The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. Jeff, who is my much older brother, and I were born on Prince Edward Island, and we are two very proud Canadians who have traveled coast to coast in this beautiful country. It has been amazing covering tech together, Jeff, over the past 20 years. So we thought we would do a special show celebrating Canadian technology for our 20th episode of the Amber Mack Show.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to it. And it's pretty wild to think that we started doing this kind of show way back in 2005. And in fact, just so our listeners know, we are looking at putting together a Command N reunion special before the end of this year to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Absolutely. And if you don't know what Command N is, that is probably one of the very first video podcasts ever done out of Canada that rose up the charts in Apple Podcasts way back when. So it will be really fun to take a look back. But let's shift back to this episode. We have a great interview with the AI reporter at The Logic, who's going to explain why artificial intelligence is a Canadian story and how that story has been decades in the making. Plus, we have a bunch of awesome Canadian tech inventions, voice messages from listeners about what they're most proud of in Canadian tech, and lots more. So let's get started.
Talking Tech.
Canada is a great country to live in, and we have so much to celebrate, including a very impressive history of technological invention. Jeff and I have put together a list of Canadian tech inventions that we think every Canadian should know about. Some of these we didn't even know about before we started researching this segment. Now, keep in mind that it's sometimes difficult to say that something is strictly 100% a Canadian invention versus the inventor being Canadian or the idea being developed in Canada, but all of the following technologies have important Canadian connections. So Jeff, in no particular order, here are 10 or so inventions in Canadian tech that I think we know our listeners are going to be interested in learning about.
Absolutely. And let's start off with maybe the first Canadian technology that I had any awareness of being Canadian tech as a kid, and that's the Canadarm. This robotic arm was created in 1981 to deploy satellites and cargo in space. It also helped on spacewalks for the astronauts and other tasks like that. It was used by NASA for 30 years, including to help build the International Space Station and to repair the Hubble Space Telescope, which are two of the most important scientific instruments in all of history. So not too shabby, Canada.
Incredible. And I think that's kind of the perfect one to kick off our list. While the patent for the telephone may have been filed in the United States, its inventor, Alexander Graham Bell himself, said that he invented the telephone in Brantford, Ontario, which is also where the world's first long-distance phone call was made way back in 1876.
Yes, and that call was to Paris, Ontario. I thought it was overseas when I was researching this, but Paris, Ontario. So not quite as exciting, but still pretty cool. And there are a couple of these that I didn't realize were Canadian at all. One was the invention of alkaline batteries in 1959 by the Canadian inventor Louis Urey. This improved upon the previous zinc carbon batteries considerably, and even today is still the most common type of disposable battery in use. And I'm sure we've all seen them all over the place for years. So that's another important invention that Canadians played a key role in.
And also one I did not know about. Now, here's one that perhaps people did know about. An important historical Canadian innovation is the invention of the light bulb in 1874 by Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans in Toronto. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough investment to commercially produce their invention and sold the patent 5 years later to none other than Thomas Edison. And Jeff, when I read this line that they didn't have enough investment, it reminded me of what's happening today in the tech ecosystem, because sometimes this is still the story of Canadian tech.
Absolutely. I just had an interview actually with Digital Nova Scotia down here talking about Canadian tech and what advice would you give to people coming up. And I said, the most important thing you probably need to focus on is actually sales. If you don't end up selling something, then it's hard to say the utility in inventing it. So this is a good example where they created this incredible thing only to find that they are not the ones associated with it in history because they weren't able to sell it. They had to pass it on to Thomas Edison. So, and speaking of light, actually, let's talk about IMAX. So when I worked for Mainframe Entertainment in Vancouver, the creators of Reboot, the first computer animated television series, which is another cool Canadian first, we had a quarter scale IMAX screen right in our building, in our offices, to test the 3D animated feature I was working on there. So I thought that was incredibly cool, and I got a lot of experience going out to IMAX and things like that. It was invented in 1967. It uses 70 millimeter film cameras and an extraordinary sound setup that I'm sure you've all heard to bring you a film experience like no other. And frankly, it's probably the only thing that would get me into a theater these days because my setup at home is pretty good.
Well, I also didn't know the history of IMAX, but I will say that recently my partner Chris and son Ash, they actually went to do a tour of IMAX just outside Toronto and learned a little bit more about this history that you were talking about. So very, very cool to see that on this list. Now, Canada also has a very impressive history of medical inventions. This is so important, including the discovery of insulin by Banting and Best at University of Toronto in 1922, for which they won the Nobel Prize. But the one that seems the most high-tech to us, even though it was invented back in 1950, might be the cardiac pacemaker. This is a small device that uses electrical signals to help your heart beat at a normal rate and has saved thousands and thousands of lives.
Yeah, that was the predecessor of the implantable one, but the path for that was paved right here in Canada. And just 2 years later, Hamilton-born George Johann Klein invented the electric wheelchair, which was actually first designed to assist veterans after the Second World War. There's also an amazing invention that I didn't know about at all from the 60s and 70s called the Converto Braille machine, which converts texts, like Latin texts, into Braille for visually impaired people. And it was invented by Roland Garlineau from Hull, Quebec, right across the river from Ottawa. And it initially transcribed text into Braille at a rate of 100 words per minute. And I just want to say how fantastic it is to see how many Canadian tech inventions, and there's many more that we've named here, that have been aimed at helping people with disabilities live better lives and things like that we can really, really be proud of. So pretty cool to see those kind of things coming out of Canadian creativity.
I think it's probably fair that some of these inventions right here in Canada, I mean, they really speak to the volume of the number of people that are here focusing on accessible tech, right? Like right back into the history of what you were just talking about. And that's kind of reflective of Canadian values in the first place, a very inclusive society. So really good to see. Now, we can, of course, not have a list of great Canadian tech without acknowledging the importance of Research in Motion's BlackBerry. I loved my BlackBerry at the time. Yeah. The original BlackBerry released in 1999, just a few years after a Canadian invented the 56K modem. That original BlackBerry was basically an email-capable pager. But 3 years later, RIM invented the most popular smartphone of its time, half a decade before the original iPhone. The BlackBerry was, of course, iconic. You know, people were attached to their BlackBerries. This is when I started to hear that term phantom vibration because we were used to it buzzing all the time and getting notifications. It had a full keyboard at the time, a very unique shape. And even though the company eventually faded, it laid the path for Canadian tech of its time. And it really put Waterloo on the map for innovation. And that continues today.
Yeah, and I think Research in Motion or BlackBerry is still doing some security stuff these days. So they've shifted away from what they started as, but it's actually a pretty coherent evolution. So that's great to see as well. And I also wanted to note that the first big breakthrough in multi-touch technology, speaking of the iPhone, actually happened at University of Toronto in 1982, when their input research group created the very first human input multi-touch screen, paving the way for how we all use our phones and tablets today. So that's pretty awesome.
Okay, so continuing with BlackBerry, another very cool communications device invented by a Canadian, again, something I didn't know about, is the walkie-talkie. This was created in 1937 by Don Higgs to help pilots and soldiers communicate. It's obviously evolved to be used in a variety of different situations. There is some debate, I should say, however, about who created the very first walkie-talkie, but thankfully the other major contender was also a Canadian. Toronto Toronto-born Alfred Gross, who had been working on a similar device when he was just 12 years old, which is incredible, and who also patented the first telephone pager system way back in 1949. Another technology, along with the snowmobile we mentioned above, being initially intended for use by physicians.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. And sticking with some military applications here, another cool military-related invention is sonar, which Robert William Boyle of Newfoundland helped invent during the First World War in collaboration with French scientists, which obviously is super important, not just for wartime, but now it's used for all sorts of things, including fishing and whatnot. But I also think we need at least one full-on computer-related invention. And so I've picked 1994's creation of the Java programming language by James Gosling, which is a key part of the Android OS and was the third most popular programming language on GitHub in 2022. Although its use is admittedly diminishing over time, that's quite an accomplishment. And just to tag on to that, let's also pay our respects here to Alan Emtage, the McGill postgrad student who created Archie, the very first internet search engine.
Very cool. So we're getting into modern days. So let's close off this list of Canadian tech inventions with one that is really close to our hearts, because this person has been a guest on the Amber Mac Show, one of our first shows. Also an Order of Canada recipient, Flavio Volpe. Project Arrow is an electric vehicle that was revealed to the public at CES in 2023. That is, of course, the big trade show in Las Vegas. Named after the Avro Canada CF-105 Aero Canadian military aircraft from the late 1950s, Project Arrow is a completely Canadian creation that aims to demonstrate that we can, in fact, build every aspect of a modern electric vehicle right here at home in Canada.
Yeah, I can't wait to see where that goes. That's a new one, like you say. So we'll see the future being written there, but it's wonderful to see that kind of thing being done domestically. And now let's hear from a few of our listeners who have called in to let us know what they're most proud about in Canadian technology.
Talking Tech.
Hi, my name is Steve Morrison. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And when I think about Canadian tech, I think about our gaming studios. Ubisoft has offices here in Halifax and Toronto. There's HP Studios in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. Gameloft does a lot of the mobile gaming space. There's a lot to really be proud of for that, and I don't think a lot of people really realize it. Happy Canada Day.
Hi, this is Krista Swanson, VP of Corporate IT at Kinaxis, HQ in Ottawa. What makes me the most proud about Canadian technology is how we lead with values. Innovation here isn't just about the next big thing. It's about building responsibly, scaling sustainably, and putting people at the center of technology. I see it in the way we embrace AI with caution and curiosity, how we collaborate across sectors, and how we grow talent that's as kind, friendly, and just generally caring as it is brilliant. That's a uniquely Canadian strength, and it's the kind of tech ecosystem I'm proud to be a part of.
Hi there, it's Keith Vanderwees in Toronto. I think the thing that makes me most proud about Canadian tech, the thing that first comes to mind is the Canadarm, which was created with Canadian technology and which is instrumental on the space shuttle, I believe, back in the day. And for me, that was a major turning point for Canadian tech in my mind that I saw it on the world stage.
Hey, Jeff and Amber. Happy Canada Day. Jordy Morgan here in Halifax. I suppose this may not sit among the pantheon of technological innovators in Canada in most people's minds, but here in Atlantic Canada, perhaps one of the most important technological innovators from the corporate sets is Clearwater Seafoods. I mean, even going back to 1979, they had the first dry land lobster pound, which really turned the entire industry on its head in terms of what was possible. They then got on to onboard processing and freezer technology, advanced vessel technologies that had sonar and GPS mapping systems and automated harvesting equipment. They got into data-driven fisheries management. That means they could better monitor fish stocks and the ecosystem health. Cold chain and logistics technology, product and packaging innovation, and all of this is based around technology and their desire to differentiate themselves as a technologically advanced company in an industry that traditionally wasn't. So, by leveraging smart vessels and onboard processing and data analytics and all that kind of stuff, Clearwater Seafoods ended up becoming one of the most successful companies that we've seen in Atlantic Canada. So I'm kind of proud of that as an Atlantic Canadian, in spite of the fact I had nothing to do with it. But if you want to read something about it, Net Worth, it's a book by Quentin Casey about John Risley and his development of Clearwater Seafoods is a great read. Happy Canada Day.
From a listener, Sophie. She mentions wanting to contribute to a Canada Day special, but felt a bit shy about sending her voice.
Okay, so what did she do instead?
She sent in written text an ode to Command N and Amber Mack. She talks about Command N, which she remembers as this excellent video podcast from like the mid 2000s, maybe 2005 to 2010.
Wow, yeah, that's going back a bit.
Totally. She loved its excellent tech coverage and mentioned they often filmed in interesting outdoor locations. She called it a podcast of its time. Really evocative.
Hey there, I'm Ryan Snowwood, Director of Marketing and Communications at XP Gaming and owner of Game Ignite, based here in Halifax. What makes me most proud of Canadian tech, especially in the video game industry, is how we show up for each other. There's a real sense of community and collaboration here. Whether you're an indie studio working on your first title or a much larger studio scaling globally, there's always this willingness to connect, to share knowledge, to lift each other up. And that spirit of collaboration, it drives innovation and creativity in a way that I believe is core to why the Canadian games industry here punches so high above its weight. It's so impactful. We see it in how people from around the world come here and are blown away about what we have and how we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible. We truly are more than the sum of our parts. And it's no surprise that we have a $5.1 billion industry that continues to grow and thrive. Each province, well, it's actually, you can see it at a grassroots level as well. Each province has its own community, and collectively we all work together as well. So groups like Third Wednesday, Interactive Society of Nova Scotia, they're all focused on bringing us all together, building the tech and games industry, and supporting each other and recognizing we all do better together. It is core to our industry, and it's remarkable, it's special, and I absolutely love that we have that here in Canada.
Thankfully, there is more to the world than just technology. So we are also going to share some not so high-tech Canadian inventions to show the diversity and range of Canadian innovation.
And I'm going to start off with something a little close to home here, or at least where I call home now. While the earliest paper making happened in China somewhere between 25 and 220 AD, the first newsprint, that's paper made from wood pulp that we've seen in all the newspapers over the years, was created in 1838 by Charles Fennerty right here in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Love it. In a lot of ways, newspapers are the most immediate predecessor to social media and the internet in that they provided often daily news and other updates and a chance for people to really contribute in the conversation through letters to the editor and things like that. Mr. Fennerty, unfortunately for him, neglected to patent this invention, but that has probably been a bit of a boon for the rest of us. So when you think about the look and feel of old school newspapers, remember that newsprint was invented right where you are right now, Jeff, in the Maritimes.
Yay. And speaking of newsprint, it takes me back to catalogs back in the day, which were so popular. And as any pre-internet teenage boy in Canada with a Sears catalog might be pleased to learn, the classic Wonder Bra was invented by Quebec designer Louise Poirier. Now, this wasn't the first modern bra ever, which was patented in 1914, but Wonder Bra's Dreamlift Model 1300, very catchy name, was the world's first push-up bra, and therefore an important foundation piece pun very much intended in the evolution of lingerie.
Wow. I didn't expect that from you, but I probably should have realized that in terms of the history of the Wonder Bra. Really cool to know. We're going to stray a little bit from the lingerie angle and focus on another female inventor. Canadians have created a lot of inventions for use around the home, and one of these was the Jolly Jumper, a bouncing seat for babies that was popular in the 1950s and 1960s and still today. Its creator, Olivia Poole, was one of the first Indigenous women in Canada to patent an invention. And the Jolly Jumper brand is still based in Canada all these years later, which is so incredible, Jeff. Again, another story that I think Canadians need to know about, especially moms who are familiar with the Jolly Jumper, and that there were female inventors way back then when.
Absolutely. And it's a crazy origin story. It's wonderful to see the Indigenous angle there too. I'm not sure if I've ever had one of those, but I can definitely picture the Jolly Jumper very clearly in my head. And it shows inventions don't always have to be super flashy to be very useful. But speaking of bouncing around, Canadians also invented the first snowmobile, patented in 1937 by Joseph Armand Bombardier in Quebec. Now, strangely enough, the original snowmobile had 7 seats. It was designed for doctors and actually priests and the like living in remote areas to more easily get around, which makes a ton of sense, obviously, in snowy places. But it was also used in World War II before becoming a favorite Canadian winter pastime, which I think I was probably 10 or 12 years old last time I drove one of those way back in our Dunstaffnage days.
All I remember in those Dunstaffnage days is maybe it was Dad who would be yelling because the snowmobiles would be zooming across our property in the country. That would be my memory of that. Before we move on, it's worth mentioning that I think most of us will also recognize the inventor's last name as the founder of Bombardier Inc., which became a famous Canadian aerospace manufacturer and is the top maker of business jets in the world. Of course, again, another incredible Canadian inventor. Now let's take a sharp turn into the world of sports. Jeff, you have a little origin story about this.
I do. There's the cool sort of story in contrast. I remember being on vacation in the United States with my wife and her dad's family, who are from the northeastern United States. They, like a lot of Americans, are pretty sports intense, pretty sports crazy, and you know how sports through school is so different in the US than it is in Canada. I played football when I was 12 on PEI and was defensive captain in Ottawa in high school and even played at McGill, yet nothing at any of those levels would compare to the enormous scale of football in the States, which might explain their surprise. So I was talking with my wife's cousins and they couldn't believe it, and they looked up to make sure that Canadians invented not only hockey and lacrosse, but also basketball, which a lot of us might know from James Naismith in 1891 from the Canadian Heritage Mint. That was very popular on that. Plus, the very first modern football game was played in 1874 between Harvard and McGill University. So yay for Canadian sports innovations too.
Very cool. And speaking of hockey, ice hockey was invented in the 1800s. The goalie mask wasn't invented, however, until 1960 by someone who had a vested interest, professional hockey goaltender and Canadian Jacques Plante. And in another hockey-related invention that spread everywhere in televised sports, Canadian George Retzlaff invented the instant replay in 1955, which was first used during CBC's Hockey Night in Canada. So a lot of hockey inventions and innovations.
Yeah, and just to get a closing remark about hockey in, even though the Americans are catching up with us, roughly 41% of current NHL players are Canadian, with only around 29% being American these days. A decade ago, it was basically half Canadians, and in the 1980s, when I was growing up, it was more than 75% Canadians. So for comparison, the third most common player nationality now in the NHL is the Swedes at a bit over 9% of the players. So it's certainly an area where we can still say we comfortably dominate.
Sure do. Now, in another not quite technology, but life-changing invention, the world owes its time zones to Canadian Sir Sanford Fleming, who's the father of International Standard Time, which he convinced North American railways to adopt in 1883 and then helped spread around the world.
Yeah, and strangely enough, there are, I guess maybe not that strangely, but there are a few Canadian railway related inventions, including the railway car brake and the rotary railroad snowplow. I think I even read something about the first air conditioned railroad car and some other ones like that while I was doing some research. So that's fascinating, but while not directly related to transportation, the square headed and generally superior Robertson screw was, of course, invented by Canadian Peter Robertson in 1908 and was admired and used by none other than Henry Ford in his Model T car production in Canada.
Oh my goodness, I am learning so much along the way. I feel like I should have known some of these things. Here's one that you will be interested in, Jeff. I know you're a musician, and probably lots of people who are listening perhaps are musicians as well. The world's first electric organ was patented in 1928 by Canadian Morse Robb of Belleville, Ontario.
Yeah, that's also cool. And I got to wonder if that's also tied into hockey too, given how popular the organ was at hockey games. But who knows? And we could go on for a long time outlining the extraordinary number of Canadian inventions, but I think we'll leave it at that for now. Let us know on social media if there are any great Canadian inventions you think we should have included, and we'd love to hear more from you on that.
And we'll be back a little bit later in the show with 5 Canadian tech tools that we have used over the years in our businesses, as well as some listener voicemails on some of the great Canadian tech that they're using or have used over the past few years too.
And coming up next, we talk to the AI reporter at The Logic about Canada's rich history in artificial intelligence that's helping to shape the work of today's tech giants.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Murad Hamadi covers artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing, and other deep technologies for The Logic. Amber spoke to him about Canada's AI story, which deserves more attention and respect than it gets, and you'll hear why throughout their conversation. Let's take a listen.
AI Spotlight.
Rod, thank you so much for joining me. This is our Canada Day Tech Special, and we were thinking about the perfect person to speak to about Canada's AI story. This is a theme that has come up time and time again on the Amber Mac Show. So let's talk about Canada's AI story. We're going to talk about what's happening today, but I wanted to talk historically a little bit about AI's roots in Canada. So take me back to the beginning of some of the work from the godfathers of AI that has taken place in this country.
Yeah, and so this is really sort of a long story that's exploded in the last few years. So going back several decades, I mean, I think you can go back as far as the early 2000s, when a group of researchers in Canada and elsewhere, but quite a lot of them in Canada, were doing this thing called neural networks. And this is a particular way of thinking about both the brain and AI. So the idea is, AI, some form of AI has existed for a long time, but like instead of basically building what you could think of as like an elaborate phone tree, like lots of links and coding, this was meant to work a little bit the way that the brain worked. And at the time, in the early 2000s, this was sort of considered a bit of a rogue branch of computer science and AI. The idea had been around for a long time, but nobody thought it could actually work. And so the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CIFAR, actually funded Geoff Hinton, one of these godfathers, one of these pioneers of AI at U of T, funded a proposal that he had to basically set up a network of researchers primarily in Toronto and in Montreal, so Montreal around Yoshua Bengio, to work on this stuff. And so between the two of them and their students, they kind of built out this almost like a training tree or a coaching tree of graduates. They'd have a few grad students every year, a few PhD students. They'd all work together. They'd come together in the summers in Montreal or Toronto, sometimes in New York, to share their research and talk about the new advances. But it was kind of all happening in the background. Like people have described this to me in the early years. I believe in the first year that it happened, the summer school happened, there were literally it was like literally a windowless room. Not quite a basement, but pretty close. And so over time, this grew and grew and grew a little bit. And then in the early 2010s, there was this major breakthrough called AlexNet. And the idea there was there's this competition run by another pioneer of AI, Fei-Fei Li, out of Stanford. to try and categorize images. So like, what is in this image? What's the best categorization you could do? And three researchers at the University of Toronto, so Jeff Hinton and his students, Alex Krizhevsky and Ilya Sutskever, who comes up quite a lot now these days in AI around OpenAI, built this tool that could do the categorization better than any AI system out there. People talk about this as the AlexNet moment. And sort of modern AI kind of starts there for some people. These three go off to work for Google. And then years later, Ilya helps found OpenAI. OpenAI gives us ChatGPT, and that gets us to where we are today.
It is really a fascinating history. And it's a history I think that many of us who have worked or reported on tech for a long time are familiar with. But I would also argue that the average Canadian maybe is unfamiliar with these AI roots. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I entirely agree with you. It's funny because a couple of years ago, we wrote this series of stories. I wrote several thousand words, somewhat to my editor's chagrin initially, about the history of Canadian AI. And when I did it, I ended up realizing how much of it I had missed at the time. So in 2011, 2012, when AlexNet was happening at U of T, I was actually an undergrad at U of T, like 3 or 4 buildings over. I had friends in the engineering department at the time, and I had no idea what was going on. Like, it was making some level of global news, but it was making news to a set of people who understood what this could be. And frankly, this is part of the story of AI. Is it's been around the corner for so long. We talked a lot internally at The Logic, and I just talked to a lot of people over the last couple of years about, like, what was it about ChatGPT that really, like, caused this whole moment, right? Because if you were paying attention to AI, you knew stuff was happening. But there's been reporting that says that even OpenAI didn't realize how big ChatGPT was going to be. It was like a little bit of a test that they built. They put it out there. They did not anticipate what it would become. And it's because you and I and everybody who's watching this has probably been using some form of AI for years, like Siri. If you get a parcel from like Canada Post or Purelator or something, there's probably some kind of algorithm that helped direct how that parcel ended up at your door, like which van it should go on. Like, there's not like somebody, doing the wires or whatever in the back end. But that stuff felt it was kind of invisible, right? Like, you didn't really think about it. You only actually really thought about it when like Siri was giving you a bad answer and you were like, what is this? It's the seamlessness of the experience that has brought it into focus. And then you ask the question, who built this and why does this exist? And it turns out the answer involves a lot of Canadians.
Yeah, it is an incredible story of Canadian innovation. Even when you talk about ChatGPT, I was reading recently, it's the 5th most popular website today in the world. So in just a few short years, we've seen so many people who are starting to use AI on a regular basis. Even if they used it before, I think they're much more aware that they are using it in some capacity today. We're also seeing in Canada that even though we have these really deep roots in AI research, that the adoption of AI, especially within businesses, is slow. The stats all say the same thing. We're a little bit slower when it comes to adoption and even commercialization compared to other countries around the world. Why do you think that is?
This is a long-standing story that predates AI. I mean, digital technology in general, Canadian businesses are very bad at adopting. I've started saying that more and more explicitly because I think a lot of the talk around the AI sector has been like, what can the government do to make us more competitive? And the reality is that large Canadian businesses, but particularly small businesses, have been slow to adopt every wave of technology that we've seen. There's a lot of different theories. One of them is simply the concentratedness of the Canadian market. Peter Nicholson, who's a sort of he's as close to as we get to like a rock star industrial economist in Canada, although I imagine he'd hate that phrasing. Talks about like, if you're working in a relatively small market and you don't have a lot of major competition, your incentive to spend money on new technologies is lower. Like, you're doing fine making money serving people the way you've always done. So there's not that intensity to like try something new. That's one set of things. The other set of things is frankly, these tools are not, it's not clear yet necessarily what these tools are good for or how good they are at it. So there are certain use cases where generative tools have really, like, where you talk to people working in those industries and the value has been very clear. So coding is one of them. Speeding up the process of coding, certainly bug checking, that kind of thing. To some degree, customer service. So there are some companies, there's a company in Toronto called Ada, which their modeling suggests that their AI agents are getting close to on par with human agents. In some cases, are on par with human, like customer service reps. Everybody says I don't want to talk to a chatbot, and it turns out actually a lot of people are fine with talking to a chatbot as long as it can get stuff done. So it's teaching people what the right use case is, and then showing them actual value from it. That's where the gap is right now.
It's interesting too, beyond those announcements, to think about the regulation side of artificial intelligence, because there has been lots of talk, especially as of late, of how we put guardrails around what's happening on the AI front. At the same time, and just link this back to the beginning of our conversation when we talk about one of the godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, he has been doing podcasts, events, really warning people about the dangers of artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to potentially displacing and replacing workers. Do you think that Canada is able to both recognize and realize the opportunity that exists when it comes to AI adoption within government and beyond, but also be a leader when it comes to regulation around AI? Are those things compatible? Because I think governments around the world are trying to figure that out.
Yeah, let me split this into two, because I think they're somewhat different. We'll come to the sort of job displacement piece in a second, because I think that's really important and sort of under focused on in this. On the pure regulation, like what should companies be able to build and do with the technology, the G7 was a really interesting moment for this. So again, not to take you back too far, but in 2023, I was in Milton Keynes, it's a small town outside of London, for the AI Safety Summit, the British AI Safety Summit, which came at this moment. It came shortly after ChatGPT, shortly after Geoff Hinton had left Google, and shortly after Geoff Hinton and Yoshua Bengio had both been started talking publicly and frequently about their concerns about the dangers of AI. Now, in that moment, a lot of the talk, a lot of the coverage, even, and frankly, quite a lot of what both of them were saying was about existential risk, the idea that humanity might be in danger because of this. But that sort of fit into this broader thing of, like, there was a lot of focus on regulation, governance, safety. These were kind of the words of the moment. And that same year, the G7's AI statement, not that they do one every year, but that year in Japan, there was an AI statement that focused on governance and responsible use of AI. Now, fast forward to this year, we have the successor summit to the Bletchley Park Summit in France. That one is very much focused on adoption. This statement is very much focused on adoption. We've had the new Canadian AI Minister, Evan Solomon, talking about, possibly suggesting that the Canadian government, that Canada might have over-indexed on warnings and regulation in the past, saying not, and I want to be clear here, he said, there is a place for regulation, we do need regulation, but one of the things he said was, the US and China will not stomach or will not countenance any restrictions that hold back their industries. So it's kind of futile for Canada to try and go it alone. So that is a tone shift, and it's kind of hard to pin down a little bit, but I think tone matters when you're talking about regulation and what companies are attempting. That's one side of things. On the job displacement side, this is, I think, the sort of coming frontier of AI conversation and regulation. You've started to see people like Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei talking about this, like low-level jobs. And my colleague of mine, Catherine, actually wrote the story recently about low-level jobs being displaced by AI because companies have decided that they don't need sort of entry-level work. Now, will they change their minds eventually about that? That remains to be seen. But all this is a long way of saying, there was a big package of funding in the last federal budget that we had, which was last year's federal budget for AI, and most of it was spent on cloud infrastructure, compute. There was some money in there for skills and like retraining, but it was, that number starts with an M and not a B. Like we're talking about significant differences. So I think that is the next sort of frontier of conversation about this.
So let's talk about that as we wrap up the conversation in terms of the future of AI in Canada, because when we think about the future of work, the future of small and medium-sized businesses, these are audiences that I speak to on a regular basis when I'm talking about AI and keynoting. And I would say that largely they are fearful of this next wave of technology. And I would say even underskilled and unprepared a little bit. How do we actually improve that? Because I don't think Canada can necessarily be a leader on the AI front if we don't more seriously recognize this issue that we're facing right now, and maybe that investment goes from a number with an M to a number with a B in front of it, because we do have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I think everybody is struggling with this at the moment. I think it starts to like raise some fundamental questions about like the nature of work or the nature of like school, right? Like as if kids haven't been through enough in the last few years of the pandemic. Now they're emerging into a world where like, what are the jobs? What are the skills that they're going to need to do those jobs? It used to be, my dad always said, you go to university not to like learn stuff. You go to university to learn how to learn stuff, to learn how to think, not specific bits of information. I have an arts education, so take that for what that's worth. But I do think you get into these questions of like, can an ordinary person retrain themselves to have this kind of skills? And the quick analogy I draw is, it's funny, right? Because generative AI has switched the focus of what's going to get automated. Like it used to be that we would talk about basically robotics is what we were talking about, factory work, manual work. And now we're talking really mostly about what might be called knowledge work or like information-based work being automated by these systems. But they used to talk about long-haul trucking, like really difficult job. How do you convince new people to join the long-haul trucking business if everyone's saying it's going to be automated away in 10 years? Why would anyone new join that industry? And I think we're at that moment of inflection where it's like why would anyone train to do a job that might be automated in a few years? But like if they doesn't get automated in a few years, then we lose all of that capability. So I don't have any answers. I have a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions as well. It seems like we certainly have a lot of work to do on the AI front to imagine Canada, I think, as a leader in this space beyond just research. I know you do a lot of work writing about AI in Canada. So for people who want to follow you, where's the best place to go?
thelogic.co. There's a lot going on there, more than I can keep track of these days. But yeah, that's where my stuff is.
Well, I'm hopeful that our jobs won't get automated away. So hopefully we can chat again in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Murad and Amber. Next up, we talk about 5 Canadian tech tools we've used in our businesses, and then it's your turn to share the Canadian tech products you love from our audience voicemails.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Well, we're nearing the end of our first Canadian technology special on the Amber Mac Show, and we like it when people put their money where their mouth is. So Amber and I have decided we would share a handful of Canadian tech tools that we've used in our businesses over the years. Topping the list is FreshBooks, which is integral to our business, and we've used it for longer than I can remember, frankly. It's a great software as a service platform for electronic invoicing, expenses, time tracking, and lots more. It's a Toronto-based company that was founded in 2003, and it's expanded its offerings over the years without losing its human touch. And in fact, it might be the tech company that makes it easiest to get an actual human being on the phone for support, a rarity these days, and our experience is that they're always ready to help. So well done, FreshBooks. Another tool that we've used for years, especially after souring a bit on GoDaddy's antics, our old-time Command N sponsor back in the day, is the Canadian domain registration company Hover. Hover used to be 2 cows way back in our Command N days, and as of mid-2023, it was the third largest accredited registrar in the world. But another awesome Canadian alternative for hosting is Web Hosting Canada, who are friends of the show and do an amazing job making domain management easy too. And it's wonderful to see that there are multiple great Canadian providers to fulfill needs like these that we all have. Next, while we don't use them anymore, we used to use Vancouver's Hootsuite for years, and it's been a long time go-to for social media management. It's super powerful, it's got sophisticated monitoring and posting tools, and it's basically influenced the entire social media management industry since it launched way back in 2008. So good for you, Hootsuite. Another service that I used to use a lot before password management in Apple products evolved to a tolerable level is 1Password. This Toronto-based password manager has been around for almost 20 years, becoming one of the most trusted names in security software. And it's expanded its functionality to grow along with the ever-evolving web. And finally, no list of Canadian software providers would be complete without Shopify, an e-commerce platform that's one of the great Canadian success stories of the past 20 years. Based in Ottawa, Shopify makes selling online easy for everyone. And to get some idea how big they are now, they processed almost 300 billion in transactions in 2024. So those are some great Canadian tech companies we've loved and used. Now let's hear some recommendations from our listeners.
Getting in gear.
Hi, Amber and team. I love what you do. Thanks for bringing attention to Canadian businesses and technology. In Canada, we have a lot of tech for good, and that makes me super proud. I work for Canada Helps, which offers tools to help charities take their fundraising online and into digital spaces, no matter their size or budget. Canada Helps also provides an online marketplace with every registered charity in Canada, so you can donate to any cause you care about. There are so many great organizations in Canada using tech for improving the world around us, and I can't wait to hear more about them on your show. Happy Canada Day.
Hi, Amber. This is Dwayne Matthews. You talked a little bit about our favorite Canadian technologies. One of my favorite Canadian technologies, I guess it's a bit in stealth mode, is a company called Readocracy. And what they do is they create an extension, and when you turn on this extension, it captures all of the things that you're reading and the videos that you watch and the podcasts that you're listening to. And it allows you to turn that into a credential and captures that in a way that you can share it with potential employers. You can share it with other people on the platform. It allows you to create newsletters. I think that this has the potential to be the next Substack, and it really allows people also the opportunity to control, own their data, and even share and sell their data. So I'm pretty excited about this company. There are lots of implications for schools, for organizations, for resumes. Pretty cool stuff.
Hi Amber, this is Mary Yazdani, co-founder of Reasonix Labs in Ottawa. What makes me proud about Canadian tech is how we are leading globally in responsible innovation. At Reasonix, we are building AI-powered tools that ensure safety in autonomous systems and robotics, because in Canada, we don't just chase progress, we prioritize people. That commitment to ethics, safety, and impact is what sets Canadian tech apart. I'm proud to be part of a tech community that believes innovation should make the world not just smarter, but safer. That's the Canada I'm proud to represent.
It's Robin Reed from Milton, Ontario, Canada. Heyorka is an amazing Canadian tech company based out of St. John's, Newfoundland. They develop social media collaboration tools for marketing agencies. So if you're looking for some amazing Canadian tech, I suggest you take a look at them.
I use a couple of Canadian tech companies in my office. I am head of the finance department, and we use FloatCard for expense reports. And it's an expense management system that takes the headache out of collecting receipts from everybody at the end of the month. it works really well for us. And the other one we use is Coho, which is used for our petty cash. And we use that. We have been using that for quite some time now, and we love that one as well.
Hey Amber, it's Michael Nussbacher from Toronto, and I've got to give a big Canada Day shout out to Dave Arsham and the incredible team at Ribbon. I actually joined Ribbon recently after going through the hiring experience myself, and I couldn't believe it. So I applied, I had an AI-powered interview, and instead of feeling ghosted or judged, I felt seen and supported, like someone actually wanted me to succeed. And now I'm on the other side, and I'm helping bring that same experience to job seekers and hiring teams right across the country and the world. Ribbon is a proudly Canadian company where we're building AI that doesn't replace people, it actually elevates them. And we're making hiring faster and fairer and way less painful, honestly. So I'm loving doing meaningful work with some great people, and we're doing it in a country that knows how to build cool stuff. So happy Canada Day, and thanks, Amber, for giving us companies like Ribbon a moment in the spotlight.
Well, that's it for our first Canadian Tech Special, and we wanted to thank everyone who contributed. It's been so great to hear from our audience and have them be part of the show. So we're going to look at doing a lot more of that in the future, aren't we, Amber?
Absolutely. Loved hearing everybody's feedback, and so many people contributed. So that was a fantastic part of this episode. And please stay tuned for our Command N reunion special 20 years later. So it's going to be a lot to cover in terms of where we've come from on reporting on tech. Thanks for listening on SiriusXM, and please don't forget to subscribe to the Amber Mac Show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check out all of our video content over on YouTube at Amber Mac. Again, thanks for listening and supporting independent Canadian content. And as always, let us know on social media what you would like us to cover next. If you're looking for another way to stay on top of the latest tech news, I wanted to remind you that every Tuesday I send out a free email newsletter that will land in your inbox, and it's all about what's happening in technology and more. Each week we dive into what's happening in artificial intelligence. We also do a breakdown in terms of what you need to know about some of the latest threats online. We will dive into all of the apps that are trending online and tell you if they are safe to download, and lots more. We also do regular segments on climate tech and some fun stuff too for those people interested in how to lead on the tech front in a very fast future. Please join our community of 10,000 subscribers. All you have to do is head on over to my website. That's ambermac.com/newsletter, and you can join for free and sign up as we try to navigate our fast future better together.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.